welcome to Transfer Talk. Coming up on today's show, could Chelsea be set to land Napoli striker Victor Osimhen in a deal which could see Romelu Lukaku go in the opposite direction? Could Leroy Sané be set to return to the Premier League? We'll tell you which top six club is monitoring his future. Will Kevin De Bruyne leave Manchester City in the next month? We'll tell you what his manager Pep Guardiola has had to say. And Aaron Wan-Bissaka's time at Manchester United might be coming to an end. We'll tell you which Premier League club is interested in signing him. Well, we've got some breaking news to bring you from the ECB, so let's head straight to our reporter, James Cole. James, what can you tell us?
Yeah, confirmation, as you can see at the bottom of your screen, that Matthew Mott, England's white ball coach, has stepped down. This was reported last week. Rumours were doing the rounds at Edgbaston ahead of England's test there, that Matthew Mott had left his role. The ECB didn't confirm it last week, but they have confirmed it today. He steps down, the Australian, after Rob Key, England's director of men's cricket, conducted a white ball review following the World Cup in the Caribbean, the T20 World Cup back in June. In a statement, Rob Key says after 3 World Cup cycles in a short space of time, I now feel the team needs a new direction to prepare for the challenges ahead. This decision was not made lightly, but I believe it is the right time for the team's future success. With our focus shifting towards the Champions Trophy early next year and the next cycle of white ball competition, it is crucial that we ensure the team is focused and prepared. As I say, Rob Key undertook this white ball review following the World Cup. The T20 World Cup in the Caribbean, England made the semi-finals. It wasn't an awful campaign. The performances weren't at the standard that we've come to expect from England's white ball team. They beat only one test-playing nation on their way to that semi-final, where they were thrashed by the eventual winners, India. But I think the damage from what was done the previous autumn, that shambolic defence of the 50-over World Cup in India, where England won just 3 out of 9 games. They were beaten by Afghanistan. They didn't make the knockout stages. There was talk of mixed messaging on and off the field. There was a lot going on. And it's fair to say, a shambolic defence of that 50-over World Cup in India. I think that is what did the damage for Mott. It meant that going to the Caribbean, the expectations were really high in terms of England's performance. And although they made the semi-finals, clearly, as Rob Key says, they feel they now need to move in a different direction. Joss Butler's position was also in question heading to the World Cup in June. He's been given the backing, though, to continue as captain going forward. And Marcus Trescothick, who's coaching with the England Test team at the moment, has now been put in charge temporarily of the white ball side. He'll work with Joss Butler through the summer because England play Australia in 3 T20s and 5 ODIs in September, and England have bought themselves a bit of time in finding a successor because Trescothick will coach the side through to the end of the summer. We shouldn't forget Matthew Mott joined May 2022 when he first came in. He came into the role with a lot of success with Australia's women's side. And initially, he had huge success with men's side too. Remember, they went within 6 months to Australia and won that T20 World Cup. But since then, as I say, that campaign, that defence of their 50-over World Cup last autumn in India, it's been the undoing for Matthew Mott. And Rob Key and the ECB have confirmed he's left his role.
James, who could replace him permanently then, do you think?
Well, as I say, Trescothick will come in on a temporary role. It's interesting. It will be interesting to see if he wants the role permanently. He's got a good relationship with Joss Butler. He's on the ECB's payroll. He knows the setup. He knows the background. But by putting Trescothick in charge for the rest of the summer, the ECB have bought a bit of time. Rob Key can go through a thorough process in finding a replacement. I think what will be really interesting is if the next white ball coach will be allowed to coach at the IPL, for example. That would enable England to look at a broader spectrum of candidates, but then there could be a conflict of interest if your head coach is also coaching against players at the IPL, and there could also be availability issues because we've seen the IPL as such a long tournament, often overlaps with England's schedule as well. So that will be an interesting decision, a big decision for Rob Key to make. Will he let the next coach at the IPL? Early names in terms of candidates, Andrew Flintoff is one of the favourites. He's been coaching with England. He's been a consultant with the white ball team. He went to the World Cup. He's coaching in the 100 as well. We've not heard anything from Flintoff as to whether he'd throw his hat into the ring. The early favourite was Owen Morgan. When these reports first emerged that Matthew Mott had left his role, Owen Morgan was touted as his successor, but Morgan last week distanced himself from that. He said he's not interested in a coaching role at the moment and wants to focus on his media career. Another name being mentioned is Kumar Sangakkara, the former Sri Lankan wicketkeeper batsman. He's got a good relationship with Butler from the IPL with the Rajasthan Royals. That's the obvious connection there. Jonathan Trott has been coaching Afghanistan, coached them to the semi-final of the T20 World Cup, former England Test player. He's in the frame too. And then Mike Hussey, the former Australian. He's also been involved with England's white ball setup. Another coach who's coaching the 100 also has coaching experience in the IPL. So there's no shortage of candidates, but England do not need to rush. Rob Key and the ECB can take their time on this. They've bought themselves some time because Marcus Trescothick will take England through this summer and those 5 ODIs and 3 T20s against Australia in September.
Thank you very much, James. Right, there is news reaching us from Chelsea involving Enzo Fernandez. Our chief reporter, Kaveh Solokol, is here with us. Kaveh, what can you tell us?
Well, look, yesterday, for the first time this summer, Enzo Fernandez joined up with the rest of the Chelsea squad in Atlanta. Now, he apologised immediately to the rest of the Chelsea players, and we're being told that that apology has been accepted. He also trained with the rest of the Chelsea squad, and he sat down and he had lunch with the rest of the players. Now, he has also told Chelsea that he will make a significant contribution to an anti-racism charity, and Chelsea have accepted that, and Chelsea are also going to match that contribution too. And talks are now underway to decide where is the best place to put those funds. Now, of course, the background to all this is that 2 weeks ago, Chelsea started a disciplinary process involving Enzo Fernandez after this video appeared on social media, which the French Football Federation said showed him and some other Argentina players singing a racist song that referenced the heritage of some of France's black players. Now, one of Enzo Fernandez's own teammates, Wesley Fofana, who's played for France, on social media said that video was evidence of uninhibited racism. Now, what we've seen from Enzo Fernandez so far is a public apology. He's also apologised in private to his Chelsea teammates. He's been in contact with them. Yesterday was his first opportunity to apologise face to face. And my understanding is that the lead figures within the Chelsea squad who were consulting with Enzo Fernandez and also the rest of the players were Reece James and Axel Disasi. Now, the disciplinary process at Chelsea is now closed. I think Chelsea feel that the player is regarded as having been very proactive. He's apologised in private, he's apologised in public, and he's also said that he's going to make this donation to an anti-racism charity. And he's also reiterated that, yes, he's made a mistake, he's sorry, but he is totally committed to anti-racism and anti-discrimination. So
is this now case closed, end of the matter as far as Chelsea are concerned?
I think from Chelsea's point of view, yes, it is the end of the matter. We're being told that the squad feel that now is the time to move on. They've accepted his apology. Of course, in the next few days, it will be interesting to hear from some of his teammates to make sure that that is in fact the case. But this is not the end of the matter. Because this didn't happen while the player was on Chelsea duty. He was on duty with Argentina. So FIFA are also investigating this. I can understand some people are going to say, look, why has the disciplinary process now stopped? Surely it should have carried on. Maybe he should have been banned from playing. I think Chelsea's thinking is the player has said sorry. The disciplinary process would probably have ended up with him being fined, and he is making this donation himself, which we're matching. So, yes, this is the end of the disciplinary matter, but I don't think it's the end of Chelsea's commitment to fighting racism and discrimination.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, to transfers now, and there's been reports linking Chelsea to Victor Osimhen. What do you know?
Well, look, when it comes to Osimhen, a couple of days ago, even a couple of weeks ago, people I was speaking to were telling me that, yes, of course, Chelsea would like to sign him, but it's just not going to happen because of his release clause. It's over £100 million, also his wages. Now, interestingly, over the past couple of days, we're being told that, yes, there is a possibility that it could now happen, and it's linked to Romelu Lukaku. Obviously, everybody knows Antonio Conte at Napoli wants Lukaku. Lukaku is on big, big money at Chelsea. He's training at Cobham. He's not in the USA at the moment. Chelsea want him to leave, but on a permanent deal. Now, if they can do a deal with Napoli for him, I think there's also a good chance that they'll do a deal for Victor Osimhen. Now, Victor Osimhen, my Sky Italy colleague, Gianluca Di Marzio, I was speaking to him in Germany. He was giving me the lowdown on what's happened with Osimhen. According to him, Osimhen has signed this new contract at Napoli, and he is on crazy money as far as Napoli are concerned. Money that they cannot afford to pay him, which is why they need him to leave. So I think if Chelsea can get Lukaku's wages off their books, potentially there's the real possibility that Osimhen could be coming to Chelsea. My personal opinion, that would be a fantastic move because he's one of the best strikers in the world, and I think it'd be great not just for Chelsea, but for the Premier League to have a player of his calibre playing in England.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about Conor Gallagher then? We've been talking about this for a while. His future still seems very uncertain.
Well, I think he's still enjoying a little bit of time off after the Euros. He needs a break. But yes, I think it's looking more and more likely that he could leave Chelsea. I know a lot of Chelsea supporters will want him to stay because he's really Chelsea through and through. But I think Chelsea are willing to do a deal for him. Atletico Madrid, we've been talking about the fact that they want to sign him. They're definitely there, but I don't think they're offering enough. I'm being told today that Chelsea are expecting Spurs to come in for him maybe in the next couple of days, maybe in the next few weeks. I think when he comes back from holiday, I think it's next week, there could be some major developments. But it looks like he is leaving. We don't know where to. It could be Spain. It could be staying in the Premier League at a club like Spurs.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Kaveh. All those stories will no doubt be discussed on the transfer show at 5 and 7 p.m. tonight. Next, we're heading to Paris. Could Jadon Sancho be heading to PSG? Welcome back to Transfer Talk. Kwaku, Dan and James are with me. It's time to get to France now and join French football expert Jonathan Johnson, who joins us live from Paris. Jonathan, thank you very much for coming on and chatting to us. There's only one place to start, and that's PSG. Loads of speculation linking them with Jadon Sancho. What are you hearing?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. Obviously, PSG and Manchester United have been linked with doing a bit of business around Manuel Ugarte as well. My understanding is that while PSG are interested in Jadon Sancho and his profile, obviously they saw him up close in the Champions League semi-final over both legs when he was extremely good in the second half of the season with Borussia Dortmund. It is my understanding that PSG like him, like the profile and the potential fit. However, there's nothing advanced on that front at the moment, as much as they would like potentially to add somebody of his sort of star caliber to the squad this summer. They are instead moving on targets like João Neves for the moment and Desiree Doué, so that would be two additions to the midfield, sort of versatile attacking options as well when you're talking about Doué. So for the moment, it's not a priority with Sancho, but he's definitely a player of interest this summer for PSG.
Jonathan, you've talked about potential incomings for PSG, but there's been a huge departure in Kylian Mbappe. Have PSG managed to find his replacement yet?
No, not quite just yet. There have been a number of names linked, though. PSG have been linked with Osimhen. You've also got the likes of Julian Alvarez as well, who is the topic of much speculation at the moment, given some of his recent comments and his potential future at Manchester City beyond this summer. But PSG seem mainly to be focused at this moment in time on trying to rebuild in the midfield a little bit. So I think once you see PSG moving for the likes of Neves and potentially Doué, we'll then probably see a bit more clarity in terms of what PSG are going to do in other positions. But putting a player into the attack, a new face, is definitely something that they have been considering. Obviously, they've got Randall Kolo-Muani, Gonzalo Ramos already in that central attacking position. Neither have worked out necessarily as expected, although I would say that Ramos has probably been a bit of a better fit than Kolo-Muani so far. But there is certainly potentially scope for PSG now financially with Mbappe's departure to move and try and bring in somebody of that very high calibre, hence the links with the likes of Osimhen but also Alvarez.
Jonathan, Xavi Simons is set to return on loan at RB Leipzig. Is that a good move for him?
I think it is a good move for him when you look at the development that he's enjoyed so far over the last 12 months or so. Obviously, moving to PSV Eindhoven was the right move for him, and then building upon that in Leipzig last season and then breaking out in the Euro with the Netherlands this summer in Germany. But I would say that this is actually probably the least complicated option as well for all parties. Leipzig know that there's no real opportunity for them to be able to sign Xavi Simons permanently. Bayern Munich were very interested, but it's a complicated situation given the agreement between PSG and PSV Eindhoven that would have seen PSV earning a big chunk of any potential summer transfer. So I think PSG in the end have elected to allow him to move on loan again to continue his spell with Leipzig, even though there was a strong desire from Luis Enrique to work with the Dutch international. The idea is that the situation will be revisited next summer, so in the summer of 2025, when any potential deal would be a bit more clear-cut between PSG and any potential suitor. But obviously it gives PSG a bit of time as well to convince Xavi Simons that his footballing future should lie with PSG.
Afternoon, Jonathan. One player who's been linked with a move to Marseille is Liverpool's Wataru Endo. What's the latest on that one?
Yeah, this was an interesting one because obviously Marseille have now signed Højbjerg, Ismail Kone as well, and they're looking at young Carboni. So I think this is one that was of interest to Marseille earlier in the summer, and they probably won't be revisiting that now. But the way that they've been rebuilding the midfield so far this summer, under Roberto De Zerbi, of course, formerly of Brighton, has been extremely interesting. There's been a number of big-name players who have gone out so far, and a couple of significant transfers in as well. So I think the Marseille rebuild is definitely going to continue to draw on talent from the Premier League, but I'm not sure that they will be returning with a bid for Endo.
Now, one deal almost done is Jake O'Brien to Everton. What will Sean Dyche be getting?
Yeah, O'Brien's rebirth with Lyon has been fascinating over this past year or so. Came in with no real expectations around him into a Lyon squad that was really low on confidence and really struggled over the first half of last season, but actually ended up emerging from the end of the campaign as one of the team's most consistent performers, chipped in with some really crucial goals as well. I think reminded people of, the fact that he's a very talented and capable defender, very imposing and also a threat from set pieces as well. So I think this one for Everton, especially when you look at the reasonably, good value for money that the deal represents, despite the fact that it is a significant profit for Lyon as well, based on what they paid to bring him in initially. So I think this is one that makes sense for all parties and suits everyone.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Great to have you on. Right, to Manchester City now, and Pep Guardiola has given us an update on Kevin De Bruyne and Julian Alvarez's futures. Pep has said they haven't had an offer, but they want Kevin De Bruyne to stay. I mean, James, has anything really changed?
Not significantly, I don't think, because last week Pep Guardiola told us that De Bruyne would stay. He said Kevin isn't leaving, so nothing's changed in that regard. But I thought what was quite interesting is that he added today, because of what De Bruyne has done over the course of the last 9 years at the club, that he has the right to decide where he wants to play, much like David Silva did after a decade at the Etihad. So we wait to see what happens if a bid does come in. But as things stand, De Bruyne will stay. Now, we've seen in the past, City haven't stood in the way when players have made it clear that they want to leave. So I think it's clear that De Bruyne won't be held at Manchester City against his will. But as yet, no concrete bid, so nothing has really changed.
No. I mean, Dan, could we be saying goodbye to one of the greatest Premier League midfielders of all time? One of the greatest Premier League players of all time?
Yeah, I mean, we don't want to give a huge tribute to De Bruyne just yet. As you mentioned, it feels like Manchester City, Pep Guardiola have reiterated the fact they want him to stay. But if he is to leave, as you mentioned, I mean, I can't do any goat noises, but he absolutely is one of the greatest of all time. When he is there with Steven Gerrard, Frank Lampard, Paul Scholes, Patrick Vieira, Roy Keane, you look at, I'm not one for just mentioning stats, but 6 Premier League trophies, 2 FA Cup titles. I lost the number of Carabao Cup trophies he's won as well. I mean, what he has done in the Premier League is incredible. I don't think we've ever seen a midfielder with the delivery he has, and if he is to leave this summer, he'll be absolutely missed. I mean, the fact Pep Guardiola still wants him to stay at the age of 33, where we've seen in previous years, as you mentioned, David Silva and others, I think says a lot about how much Guardiola still values him.
100%. And you look at this, we can talk about all-time Premier League great midfielders, but he's probably Man City's greatest player of all time. So this is why this situation has to be handled with care and delicacy, because he is a player that has been very important to Man City. He predates Pep Guardiola, and he is Man City, and we know how often they dish out statues. He will have one of those outside the Etihad because he deserves it. In my opinion, he's the greatest Premier League centre midfielder of all time. I think for him, though, the only thing missing for him is in the Champions League of City. He went off in both of the finals injured, and I feel like to put him in the pantheon of maybe the Modric's or the players in world football, he has to have that definitive moment in the Champions League, which I think he can have with City in this upcoming season. But we see the pictures there of him carrying the Premier League trophy. He's won it all at City, he's seen it all. You can't begrudge him for wanting to try something new if he does want to leave, but I can understand why Pep Guardiola wants to keep one of his most important players.
I mean, I say other Premier League clubs, but specifically Arsenal, Kwaku, will they be licking their lips at this situation, thinking hopefully he does go?
They'll have to, because right now they're City's closest competitors, and last season they pushed them closer than they did the season before, and Kevin De Bruyne was the huge reason why City won the league last season. When he came into the side, or back into the side after injury, remember the Newcastle game where he changed the face of that game and changed the face of the title race, and City went on an incredible run at the back end of the season and won the title. Arsenal will be looking at this situation with not only De Bruyne but other key players for Man City who could potentially leave this summer as an opportunity to really go again. We know how aggressive Arsenal have been in this transfer window, and we expect that if Kevin De Bruyne was to leave Man City and weaken them, Arsenal are going to be the closest challengers, and they would be licking their lips at the prospect of him possibly leaving this summer.
James, obviously Julian Alvarez's future is uncertain as well at Manchester City. Why would he want to leave the club?
One thing that Pep Guardiola has pointed out is that Alvarez wants to be involved in the biggest games. He wants to be playing in the biggest games. And I think when you look at what happened last season, he started every Premier League game up until February. But in the back end of the season, when City were chasing titles and trophies, he wasn't involved in the crucial matches. An unused substitute against Arsenal in that league match that finished 0-0. He didn't start in the FA Cup final against Manchester United. And he didn't start against Real Madrid in the Champions League knockout matches. And Guardiola said it's effectively up to Alvarez if he wants to stay or not. And he'll wait to see what Alvarez has to say. The complication is that Alvarez has had such a long season, which is almost extending into a second season now, because he's at the Olympics with Argentina. The final of that, if Argentina reach the final, is next Friday, and the Premier League season gets underway the following Friday. So there is uncertainty around somebody who, I think, despite missing out on those big games, is still a key player for Manchester City. So it's interesting. A very young player. We've seen what he's done for Manchester City, a very decorated player as well. But I think it would be a mistake for him to leave Manchester City, because they are really onto a good thing. And I don't think, unless you're Erling Haaland, you can be demanding to start every single match, especially with the competition for place they've got in that area of the pitch.
Yeah. Dan, do you see him going to any other Premier League club?
It's an interesting question, isn't it? Because I think perhaps no, only because maybe Manchester City and Pep Guardiola have learned from maybe recent windows, having sold Alexander Zinchenko, Gabriel Jesus to Arsenal. Then we all know what happened. In the last few years, Arsenal have now become their closest title challengers. So I think Manchester City won't be looking to sell Alvarez, if they do at all this summer, to a Premier League rival, because they've seen that in recent years, and it hasn't maybe, even though with all the best will of the world, they want to respect their players' wishes, it hasn't maybe benefited them long term. So I think we know Atletico Madrid are one team circling around Alvarez, so we'll have to see. As Guardiola mentioned, we'll see after the Olympics.
Quaker, you mentioned it a little bit earlier about Arsenal being so aggressive in this transfer window. We're talking about Alvarez and KDB potentially both very important players for City. What about incomings? Do you think Guardiola's going to be relying on the players he's got, or are they going to dip into the transfer market and be aggressive in that sense?
I think you can juxtapose Arsenal and Man City in this transfer window. Arsenal have been very aggressive, and City have been probably the most passive we've seen them in the last couple of seasons. I think incomings will be dependent on outgoings, because they've built and they've stockpiled such an impressive squad that they can rely on other players if players like Alvarez or Ederson were to leave. I think it is very much dependent on if those players do leave, will Pep Guardiola go into the market again and try and bring in replacements. But if you look at the City squad, it's so impressive. Players like Jack Grealish struggle for minutes in this team. He's a £100 million man who'd start for most other teams in the Premier League. And so this is a very, very strong City team, but it's a City team that's almost aged overnight. If you look at important positions, obviously Ederson's future's up in the air, Kyle Walker's now aging, Kevin De Bruyne is aging, and Pep Guardiola's future's not certain either. Normally, he'd have the guarantee of, I'm going to be your coach for the next 2 or 3 seasons. You don't have that anymore because he's got 1 year left on his contract. So that will affect transfers as well. So I think we'll see a more passive City in this transfer window. But if some of these big names do leave the club, then expect them to go again in the transfer window.
Yeah, definitely. Right, next up, Arsenal have signed Ricardo Calafiori. Who's next for Mikel Arteta? And could Leroy Sané be returning to the Premier League? To Arsenal now. Sky Germany are reporting that Arsenal are keeping an eye on the situation around Leroy Sané and his new contract talks at Bayern Munich. Sané is in talks about extending his deal there beyond his current 2025 expiry, and he's understood to prefer to remain at the club. I mean, Kwaku, Leroy Sané, obviously Bayern Munich, Arsenal keeping an eye on the situation, but can you see a 28-year-old Leroy Sané going to Arsenal and ultimately being a backup for Bukayo Saka?
I think he can be used in multiple positions. Of course, his natural position is on the right-hand side. He's left-footed, and we saw him do that not only for Bayern Munich, but for Man City as well. But we've seen in recent seasons him drift more centrally and play as an advanced number 8 or even a number 10. And if Arsenal to move Declan Rice back into the number 6 position, which they originally brought him in, you can see Sané maybe occupying one of those roles, or maybe giving Odegaard a break, who plays a lot of games as well. And so I don't think he's necessarily going to come there strictly as a backup. We saw Leandro Trossard, obviously he is more of a backup, come to Arsenal and be hugely effective. And for an Arsenal team that are chasing titles, he's going to be the kind of player they need. He's got vast experience now. He's 28 years old. And he's not the Leroy Sané that we saw at Man City that was explosive. Of course, he had that ACL injury at the beginning of the 1920 season that took a little bit away from his game. But he is more powerful. He is stronger now. And I feel like it'd be the perfect sign for Arsenal. Whether it'd be the perfect move for him, who wants to be playing consistent football week in, week out, it remains to be seen. But I think from the Arsenal point of things, I think it'll be a huge sign and a huge boost to their squad.
I mean, you mentioned he's not maybe the explosive player that we saw at Manchester City, but James, if Arsenal do get him, what player would they be getting in Leroy Sané now?
Well, he's somebody that we know plenty about from his time in the Premier League, and Mikel Arteta knows plenty about, having worked with him at Manchester City. He signed for City 8 years ago, back in 2016. He was actually one of Pep Guardiola's first signings. Enjoyed a huge amount of success in Manchester. 7 trophies in total, including 2 Premier League titles, 25 goals in just 90 games, and averaged an assist every 3 games as well. So it was absolutely devastating going forward, in particular for those 2 seasons in between. It was 4 years there. First season wasn't so brilliant, Pep's first season. Last season, as you mentioned, Kwaku had that injury. But then he decided he wanted to move elsewhere and head back to Germany to join Bayern Munich, where he scored more goals, recorded more assists, but clearly across more matches. But he did struggle in the second half of last season, as did the whole team, really. They failed to win the Bundesliga the first time in more than a decade. His last league goal came in October, so he failed to have a real impact at the back end of last season, and also didn't really make much of an impact on the Euro 2024 campaign with Germany.
Dan, does this fit in with how Arsenal have been doing things lately, especially under Mikel Arteta?
Yeah, well, I think when we look at Arsenal's business, I mean, it's all about how can they get those marginal gains against Manchester City, because we know they lost the title by 1 point last season. So where can they make those gains? I mean, Mikel Arteta said yesterday evening that, you know, they won't be in the market for the same sort of price or player as Declan Rice last summer. So they won't be spending £100 million on one player. Would Leroy Sané represent a different type of signing with 1 year left on his contract? We were talking about this, you know, what ballpark figure would we be looking at, 40, 50 million potentially? Maybe that is the marginal gain that could see Arsenal get those extra 2 points to beat Manchester City to the title.
What Arteta does also like is Premier League proven players. Look at Kai Havertz, look at David Raya, look at Jorginho, Trossard, players who've played in this league already. And so Sané, of course, he's gone to Bayern Munich, has been there for a while now, but he understands what the Premier League is about in terms of physicality, and he's put on that extra weight. And so he'd fit in absolutely perfectly. Like you mentioned there, though, it's the price. 1 year left in his contract, it's quite difficult to negotiate that, especially with a player that wants to stay at Bayern Munich. And so that will remain to be seen. But I think that Leroy Sané, at this point in his career, would be perfect for Arsenal. And like you say, give them those marginal gains, because they're getting closer and closer to City every season, and he might be the player to push them over the top.
I mean, Dan, they're being linked again, Leroy Sané, another winger. So does that mean Arsenal are happy with their striker options?
It feels like all we talked about last season was Arsenal need a striker, Arsenal need a forward, whether that's instead of Gabriel Jesus or to support him a bit more with Eddie Nketiah still there as well. That was well before Kai Havertz really made a name for himself through the middle for Arsenal, because he started as a midfielder last year, as we saw. Kai Havertz had a really strong second half of the season. He was in double digits goals and assists in his last 14 Premier League games. Gabriel Jesus didn't get to double figures in goals and assists all season. So it feels like they found someone in Havertz to play that position. And I think it is very interesting that all the signings we've been talking about around Arsenal, potential targets, are not strikers. They're kind of around the team. But I think to what Kwaku was saying about Sané, I think when you look at all the top teams at the moment, they're all aiming for players or targeting players who are versatile, who can play 2 or 3 different positions. It isn't about maybe having the numbers in the squad. It's having players who are very versatile, who can play across 2, 3, 4 positions.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Emile Smith-Rowe is heading to Fulham in a deal worth £34 million. Now, Kwaku, after everything that's happened with Emile Smith-Rowe, all of his injuries, you're excited about this move for him and seeing him in a Fulham shirt, aren't you?
Yeah, he's a player that affects winning. And if you take your mind back to the 2021 season where him and Saka really saved Arsenal, it's easy to forget how good of a player he was, given the number 10 shirt at Arsenal as well. And there's a really good article on the Sky Sports website by Nick Wright, where he details how his Smith-Rowe's Arsenal dream faded. But also points out a stat that in that 2021 season, Arsenal had a 67% win rate with Smith-Rowe starting, and that plummeted to 30% when he wasn't starting. So at a team like Fulham, where you have a bit more freedom and also have the guarantee of playing football week in, week out, you expect him to thrive. And I am excited for him and for Fulham as well, who are making some really exciting signings in this window. And he's a player that if he does get that confidence back, we can maybe see him return to form of 3 or 4 years ago. Because I remember he was on fire, wasn't he? Arsenal had the chant with him and Saka, and he seemed like he was going to set the world alight. And unfortunately, injuries coincided with Arsenal's upturn in form, and he's been kind of the forgotten man at the football club. But I think at Fulham, he'll be a great fit.
I mean, James, he was highly rated. He is highly rated by Mikel Arteta. Letting him go wouldn't have been an easy decision, would it?
No, it's always sad letting an academy graduate go, and I think Mikel Arteta has a real affinity with him because of what he did in the early years of Arteta's regime. Him and Saka sort of single-handedly increased the morale and gave Arsenal fans hope about what may be possible when many thought that Arteta perhaps wasn't the right man or that this Arsenal project wasn't going anywhere. But unfortunately, due to injuries and because of how Arsenal have evolved with the signings they've made and the progress they've made, he's just not featured. 346 minutes he played in the Premier League last season, 164 the season before, and it's hard to see him getting that many opportunities, though we know he's got such great ability, comfortable with both feet, great at carrying the ball forward, has got a goal in him, has got an assist in him as well. So despite the fact he was so excellent for Arsenal early on, it feels like Arsenal have moved on now, as sad as that is to say, and it feels like it's time for Smith-Rowe to move on as well. I really do think this works for all parties if this deal gets done, because Smith-Rowe gets an opportunity to be a talisman at a club in Fulham. Fulham have had a really difficult summer so far with the players they've let go, but for Arsenal to get a fee like that, around £35 million, it could eventually go on to be, for someone who's barely featured for them for the last 2 seasons, it is really good business and really helps them for a PSR perspective.
And Dan, for Fulham as well, potential record signing if this goes through.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we all watched Fulham a bit last season, and at times they were scintillating. I mean, they were playing kind of the football of the weekend. Sometimes they had some fantastic results under Marco Silva last season as well. And I think why I like this move for Smith-Rowe, as you mentioned, it's quite rare that a deal maybe looks like on paper it works for all parties. And I think Marco Silva has shown at Fulham that perhaps players who weren't given opportunities at their clubs or needed that first team football, like the likes of Andres Pereira or Adama Traore, had some really good moments last season after leaving Wolves. Rodrigo Muniz, I mean, I don't think many of us knew about him before he was scintillating in the second half of the season. So Marco Silva, maybe a different style to Arteta, but has shown he can improve players in a different way and also maybe give them that arm around the shoulder, give them a new home, and hopefully Smith-Rowe can have exactly that at Fulham.
Yeah, exciting times for Fulham. Now to Manchester United now, and Erik ten Hag is looking to add to his squad. Talks are advancing with Bayern Munich over Noussair Mazraoui, but any potential arrival could depend on Aaron Wan-Bissaka leaving. Dan, why do you think United are looking at Mazraoui?
I think multiple reasons. I mean, we know that Manchester United incomings are very dependent on the outgoings. We know that Aaron Wan-Bissaka is potentially going to move to West Ham if a deal can be done there. So automatically you're looking at a replacement at right back. But I think with Mazraoui, the big attraction is he can play multiple positions. And we mentioned this earlier this morning, but I think a big strength of his is the fact he can play a left back as well, because that was a huge issue for Manchester United last season. I mean, Luke Shaw, Tyrell Malacia missed a lot of football last season, which meant 6 different players had to play at left back for Manchester United last season. I mean, that is practically unheard of. So I think the fact Mazraoui can play in that position, Aaron Wan-Bissaka wasn't as comfortable when he had to deputise there is huge. And let's not forget, Mazraoui wasn't just playing a few Bundesliga games in that position. He was playing in the Champions League semi-final in that position.
Well, he kind of burst onto the scene in a more public way at the World Cup in 2022, where he had to accommodate for Hakimi being the right back and he moved to left back. And we talked about it before with the other top teams in this league. It's about adaptability. And if you've got a player like Mazraoui who can play in multiple positions, that only bodes well for a team like Manchester United, who have kind of only had players that have been pigeonholed in one position and it's limited them over the last few seasons.
I think also, just on that, it's really important to look at where Manchester United are right now. Luke Shaw's, of course, going to be given a bit of a break after the Euros. He only just returned at the final to play, a significant amount of minutes. Tyrell Malacia still isn't really training with the team out in America. So at the moment, if you look at the game against Arsenal just a few days ago that they played out in the States, young 17-year-old Harry Amos was playing at left back. I know they rate him very highly, but a 17-year-old really being your starting left back right now, maybe a bit soon.
James, how much will Aaron Wan-Bissaka need a fresh start?
Well, he's got 1 year left on his contract. There's no active conversations ongoing about extending his stay at United. So already he's probably thinking about his future being away from Manchester United, whether it's this summer or next summer. Signed in 2019. He's been there for 5 years now, 190 appearances in all competitions. He'll probably accept, and Manchester United will accept, that he hasn't progressed as much as they would like. We've seen some of his brilliant 1v1 defending that we've seen at Manchester United, but his attacking game just hasn't reached the level required for a Manchester United team who want to be challenging for the Premier League and for European titles once again. And if United do want to be more possession-focused next season, then Wan-Bissaka probably isn't the man. He's a very handy squad player, but I think United are ready to move on. I think it probably is time for Wan-Bissaka to do so as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, coming up, we'll take a look at West Ham's transfer targets as Julian Lopetegui gets straight to work in his first window in charge. got some breaking news. And Anwar El Ghazi is in talks to terminate his contract at Mainz to pursue a move to Cardiff City. The former Everton and Aston Villa winger won a wrongful dismissal case against the German club earlier this month after Mainz cancelled his contract in November following a series of social media posts made about the Israel-Gaza conflict. In July, the court ordered Mainz to pay El Ghazi more than £1 million in unpaid wages and bonuses. It's our understanding that he is yet to be paid and wants to terminate his contract and seek damages from the club for money owed before moving on. We've contacted Cardiff City for their comment. Right, to West Ham now, and Julian Lopetegui wants to add a striker. Borussia Dortmund's Niklas Füllkrug has emerged as a potential target. They are looking seriously at other forward targets as well, after being unable to find an agreement with Aston Villa for John Duran. Interest in the player remains, but as it stands, there is a big gap in valuation. There's also an interest in Villarreal forward Alexander Sørloth. James, Mikel Antonio has done an incredible job up top for West Ham, but is it now time for change?
I don't know if he can keep doing it, because it's been remarkable what he's done at West Ham. He's played in so many different positions for them, but in the last few years it has been as the central striker. And actually, despite the fact he doesn't necessarily score the goals, West Ham are such a good team when they have him as the central striker, when you've got Bowen playing on the wing, Kudus on the other flank, Paqueta pulling the strings in midfield as well. That's when West Ham have been at their best. And the season before last, when they looked like they were involved in some relegation trouble, once Antonio came in, he helped them. And last season he was brilliant, I thought, in the European campaign as well. They were unlucky to go out to Bayer Leverkusen, because he was really he caused absolute havoc for the Bayer Leverkusen defence. I know David Moyes is very unhappy about the refereeing that night. Things could have been very different for West Ham. Joe Bowen, 20 goals in all competitions last season, but I do think he is better on the flank. But I think what's worth bearing in mind, West Ham have got to be very careful because of their history with signing strikers over the course of the last 5, 6, 7 years. Danny Ings, that has not worked out so far. We wait to see what role he maybe has to play under Julian Lopetegui. And then you go back to Scamacca, just a season at West Ham, didn't work under David Moyes. And Sebastian Haller as well, I think a lot was expected of him when he joined, but that didn't work out. So I do think they need to sign a central striker, but it's so difficult to get it right, and West Ham know that more than anybody else.
Niklas Füllkrug, one of the names mentioned. What would he bring to West Ham?
He's a full-blooded striker. He's a bit of a throwback as well in terms of the style of play. He's got an incredible strike on him. And seeing him up close and personal with the Euros, you saw how much he gets the fans on side, because he does do the hard run. He does put his foot in as well. And behind Toni Kroos was probably the most popular German player, and he didn't start games for Germany at the Euros. He's a player that will get the fans on side very, very quickly at the London Stadium. And that's important for West Ham, for the fans to buy into you as a player. I think that he's not going to give you an incredible goal return in the Premier League. He scored 12 goals in 29 league games last season at Borussia Dortmund. But what he will give you is that hard run and the hold-up play that will allow West Ham to bring in their better players or more technical players, in Mohamed Kudus or Jared Bowen, who's going to give you goals. And so I think he'd be a good fit for West Ham. It's about how Julian Lopetegui utilises him. Obviously, you know how he uses strikers and how he plays in terms of the style of play. But I think Füllkrug would be a great fit for this West Ham team.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, let's turn our attention to the newly promoted teams. Leicester, Ipswich and Southampton will be doing everything they can to stay in the division. You guys have got a minute each to go through this. Dan, we're starting with you, and Leicester. Go.
Yeah, absolutely. Leicester, I think they'll need to be busy this window, because they've lost quite a few players, whether it's been expired contracts, of course, or, you know, Kenan Dewsbury-Hall went to Chelsea. I'm sure you both are very happy about that. But I think he's a big loss. He's their best player last season. You can see their incomings there. Bobby de Cordova-Reid is very versatile. He can play across the front three. Michael Golding, I've been told, 18-year-old from Chelsea, he'll have a part to play this season. Okoli, a centre-back from Atalanta, huge signing for Leicester in terms of adding a bit more pace and a bit younger as a centre-back added there. And Abdul Fattah, who, of course, was there last season. I think in terms of gaps, I'm looking at they need a striker. Jamie Vardy isn't fit at the moment. They lost Kelechi Iheanacho in terms of expired contracts. So definitely a striker, and I'd also look at midfield as main targets for Leicester.
Dan, you smashed that timing-wise. Kwaku, Ipswich.
So Ipswich, they've been pretty busy. They've looked around different places to make signings. They brought in Mari Hutchinson, obviously, as Chelsea fan known very well. Ben Johnson. They've also brought in Aaron Muric as well. Liam Delap. So they've made some signings, but there's not too much Premier League experience there beyond Ben Johnson. So I think that's where they need to target players who know how to stay in this league. They've been linked with Odobert. from Burnley, who was good for them last season. Whether he wants to go to Ipswich or look elsewhere in the Premier League remains to be seen. But I think out wide is where they need more players. Explosive wingers who can be effective in behind in the Premier League. And like I said, players who've got that experience, the know-how, who know how it works in the Premier League. Because we saw last season, the gap between the Premier League and the Championship is a big one. All 3 promoted sides went down last year. Ipswich want to avoid that. So wanting to bring in Premier League experience to kind of stave off relegation fears.
No pressure, James. 1 minute. Bang on, you're Southampton.
Well, they've had less time to prepare than anybody else because of the fact they qualified, well, they reached the Premier League once again via the playoffs. Lost Shea Adams, but they've been really busy in this window already, bringing in Adam Lallana on a free, Charlie Taylor as well. A number of these players, they want to continue this ethos of having a core of English talent. They're in talks with Villarreal around signing Ben Brereton Diaz for around £6.5 million, which I think will be really good business. And Taylor Harwood-Bellis, that has been confirmed as a permanent deal after he did so well in the Championship last season. So I think it would be really exciting to be a Southampton fan. I feel like Russell Martin's rejuvenated the entire club and they'll go into this season with real hope of staying up.
One word, who are you most excited about the promoted sides?
Ipswich.
Ipswich, actually.
Ipswich, first time back in more than 20 years.
And do you think Ipswich can stay up?
Yeah.
That wasn't a confident yes, Kwaku. Dan?
Yes.
They could win the Premier League the way Kieran McKenna's gone.
Are Ipswich going to do a Leicester? No. They're not. We did not just say that. Right. Good morning. Transfers returns tomorrow morning. You can see there at 9 a.m. Transfer Talk is back tomorrow lunchtime at midday. And for a full roundup of the day's transfer news, you can catch the Transfer Show at 5 and 7 p.m. tonight. Thank you so much, Kwaku, Dan, James. It's been a pleasure. Coming up, we'll get more on that breaking news that Matthew Mott has stepped down as England's white ball coach.